Don't know where this lands in the timeline. Don't ask me that. Some fan will figure that out for me. I don't even
just
try
agree.
Exactly.
Where do you think you're going?
21 bridges, count them. I have to find the limelight. Let me go.
There's 22 bridges in Portland right now, and the most recent one was built in 2016. The only year it had 21 bridges was in 2015, so the movie must be set in 2015. Maddie, I figured it out! Maddie? 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 Are you down here? Okay. Not in this video. Trying to construct a sensible timeline around a fictional universe is a daunting task. With so many different shows and movies and comics and other mediums making up the DC animated universe, it's tough to know what to focus on, what to let slide, what to ignore completely, what to hinge the entire timeline on for the best possible outcome. To save you some time, I'd love to direct you to a document linked in the description below, well, maybe wait till the video's over first, in which we've laid out our terms and conditions, so to speak, for how we personally go about building the DCAU timeline. Because it's something we like to be as transparent as possible about, and as objective as possible about, while taking everything from producer comments to on-screen months and years into consideration. But what it continuously comes down to is there's no perfect way to do it. There's always going to be little problems here and there. We can say with almost absolute certainty that Static Shock takes place from 1999 to 2002, but Static is still going to be 15 years old for just a few months too long. We can assume from in-show markers that Batman Beyond starts in 2039, 40 years after the new Batman adventures, despite Bruce Timm always suggesting it's 50 years later. So is it all just a big waste of time? Well, to us, no. A timeline of the DC animated universe is not infallible, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. It's like a big 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that you found in your grandma's attic, and there's some pieces missing, but you can still understand the big picture enough to put it mostly together, and you had a great time doing it. Oh, that was actually a pretty good metaphor. Good job, me. So because the DCAU has been around for, 27 years now, we've had a long time to spread out all those puzzle pieces on the floor and give them a try. As you probably know, it all started back in 1992 with Batman the Animated Series, and as the show evolved and expanded, so did the universe it inhabited, giving us adjacent cartoons such as Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, The Zeta Project, Justice League Unlimited, as well as many of the show's spin-off comic books and video games. But when JLU ended in 2006, we got a whole bunch of nothing for a long time. That break gave us as fans the opportunity to really reflect on these cartoons as a whole and as individual pieces of a larger game. I'm just gonna stick with the puzzle analogy because it's working so far. While there were smaller entries into the universe in the downtime, we didn't really get a comeback until 2017's Batman and Harley Quinn movie, even if it wasn't necessarily what most of us had been waiting 11 years for. But with this resurgence came the promise of more and more of the characters we'd grown up with, the animated universe of old that had shaped our lives since childhood and given us all something to really rally behind. And now, in 2019, we live in a world where Justice League vs. the Fatal Five exists. A movie built by a creative team who themselves are DCAU fans, and pay attention to the ins and outs of the universe in a similar fashion to a certain YouTube channel. And it's fantastic. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you have to love this movie. you don't. I personally think it's one of the best superhero movies of the decade. But hey, not everyone's me. That would be pretty disturbing if they were. I get that. What I am gonna tell you though, is where it fits with all the shows and movies that came before it. Out of all the feature films in the DCAU, this is the first one that is not a Batman something. It's firmly a Justice League Unlimited movie. So to begin, the first thing we need to understand is when that series takes place. We've established this in great detail in our past video about Lex Luthor's presidential campaign, which was actually our first timeline video on the channel. But with the way our audience has expanded in the year and a half since, I expect a lot of you may not have seen it, so I'll go ahead and do a quick recap of the basics. We know from math via Superman the Animated Series that Supergirl comes to Earth in spring of 1999 and that she's 16 years old at the time, according to her official Warner Brothers sanctioned biography. A while later in Justice League Unlimited's final season, she turns 21, cementing this season 5 years later in 2004. A handful of references to Luthor's campaign being the previous year means that the whole Cadmus-heavy chunk of episodes that brought JLU's second season to a close happened in 2003. And a reference in the show's final season to J'onn J'onzz being cooped up on the Watchtower for almost 2 years placed the start of the show in 2002. So we've got JLU running from 2002 to 2004, spring 2004 to be more specific. If this is your first time watching one of our timeline videos, put the Batmobile seatbelt on at this time because we're going to be doing a lot more heavy mathematical, it's just addition and subtraction. I shouldn't be apologizing for this. You're here. This is happening. The time period of JLU is important to keep in your head because we're basically going to be going off of that for the rest of the video. It's like the part of the puzzle that your grandma started 13 years ago, and when like you open the box and it's like partially done already, and I don't know what to do next, but at least she did all the part with like all the trees in it, because that part was that looked pretty hard to do. I didn't want to do that part. Thank you for already doing that part, Grandma. It's like that. Something else that's important in all this is understanding the placement of the Return of the Joker flashback sequence, as that's the cutoff for a lot of things in this universe. I'm gonna go into it assuming you've seen the movie, because we really go into everything on this channel assuming you've seen the thing that we're talking about, except when it comes to the episode that shall not be discussed. So, blanket spoiler warning for the rest of time. Now, what do I mean by cutoff? Well, let's think about it. The Joker dies, so this is the cutoff for Joker appearances. It's like his actual death, not like a fall into steam or blow up in a marble thing. I don't know how he came back from those either, but he's definitely dead here. Tim Drake's life is pretty much ruined, so this is the cutoff for Tim Drake Robin appearances. And while it's not explicitly stated on screen, it seems this event is the catalyst for the eventual falling out of Batman and Batgirl, as well as Batman and pretty much any ally of any kind. He's a lonely old man by the time we catch up with him in Batman Beyond, distanced from the Justice League, from Barbara Gordon, from everybody. This flashback sequence has also been mentioned by the late great Dwayne McDuffie, producer and writer of JLU and Static Shock, to be something of an uncatchable moment on the timeline, an event that will essentially always be at the tail end of present-day DCAU adventures. However, that isn't to say it's impossible to nail down a date for. It's just a lot more fluid than most things on the timeline. Since we've also already done a whole video on this, to keep it simple, we know it happens about 40 years before Return of the Joker, which takes place in summer of 2042 as best we can tell. So if almost 40 means anywhere from 35 to 39 years, this gives us a window of 2003 to 2007 for the Joker death flashback. Since we know JLU ends by 2004, the gap closes a little bit. And it closes even further with the Batman, Harley, and Ivy comic put into play, which by our calculations ends in 2005. Again, if you want to know a more detailed explanation, you can check out our Batman Beyond timeline video. So with all of this in mind, we have our basic available time chunk for Justice League vs. the Fatal Five to take place during. Context clues within the movie, like Miss Martian's appearance, or Wonder Woman's sortification, or John and Shiera being off in the space war, lead us to believe it happens after the show, so spring 2004 at the earliest, and it has to happen by 2007 at the latest. But is there anything else we can go off of? Of course there is. Bruce Timm, executive producer on the film and co-creator of Batman the Animated Series, overmaster of the DC Animated Universe, Mother of Dragons, said in a press interview at WonderCon,
"It does not take place 3 days after the end of Justice League Unlimited. It probably takes place a year or 3 years after the Justice League Unlimited."
Now, it's unclear whether Timm's timeline window is referring to the beginning of the movie or after the 10-month jump. Yes, there's a 10-month jump. It's likely to be right after Batman stops Naked Starboy, but that's just our best guess. It's not really very well expressed in the narrative. It can't be any later than Jessica Cruz's therapy session, but it seems like it would probably be before that, otherwise she would have 10 months of absolutely no character development whatsoever. In any case, this leaves us with a few different options. At the start of the movie, Mono sets the time sphere for November 20 blankety blank, which is one of the most helpful things the creative team has ever done for us. Thank you guys. Oh my god. So if we want to go with Bruce Timm's word on the 1 to 3 years difference from JLU, we're left with November 2004 as the starting point, with a 10-month jump to September 2005, the latter being over a year since the end of JLU. November 2005 is the starting point with a 10-month jump to September 2006, or November 2006 is the starting point with a 10-month jump to September 2007, the latter date being 3 years since the end of JLU. These are the only ways to stay within our Return of the Joker boundaries, since we have no idea what time of year that whole mess happened. And just to cover our asses for the future, if the JL Reunion movie or some other future DCAU movie comes out that just keeps pushing the Return of the Joker flashback just further and further forward, we'll have to figure it out at the time. But right now, this is what we know. So shush, people of the future watching this, and you're wrong about the thing you didn't say. You said Miss Martian wasn't in the DCAU, but she is now. That's what you sound like. I do want to take a second to mention these 3 different timeline options for the movie are pretty much the actual answer. We can narrow it down more, and we're about to, but in the event a future thing makes our answer in this video obsolete, we can still go back to those 3 options as continuous options. I'm probably saying way too much about that sort of thing. Let's just continue this video. How about? Okay, yeah, oh, here we go. So about that narrowing down, here's where the nitty-gritty of the DCAU timeline really comes into play. Remember up top when I mentioned how Static is 15 years old for too long? Well, the same can be said about a lot of DCAU characters. For instance, Terry McGinnis, the second Batman, is officially listed as 17 from 2040 through 2042. But following real-world logic, even in this fictitious world full of metahumans and super bat monsters and aliens and whatever else, often leads us to the best conclusions, so we can know in our hearts that people like Static or Batman do age like normal people. And this is where things get a little bit wonky, because Tim Drake likes to be 13 for 8 years. The Boy Wonder is officially 13 in the new Batman Adventures in 1999. So if current evidence points to the Return of the Joker flashback happening by 2007, then Tim can be as old as 21 by the time he gets turned into a small Joker. But does he look 21? Yeah, not really. In reality, this is simply because the DCAU creatives didn't know they'd be stretching out the timeline for several more in-universe years when they released Return of the Joker. The Justice League cartoon was barely a twinkle in Bruce Timm's eye at the time. And aging up Tim Drake's character model was most likely something nobody even dreamed needed to be done. So why am I dwelling on Robin so much? Well,
I'm not doing this with a teenager. Point taken.
Miss Martian's shape changes into Tim Drake to prove a point, and that point just happens to be that Robin, someone Batman works with all the time, is a flippin' teenager. Since this part of the movie is set in our post-10-month jump time period, if Tim is 21 in 2007, then that option is now off the table. And working backward, he'd be 20 in 2006, so that option is off the table. Leaving us with our September 2005 possibility, when Tim is 19, and the movie starting in November 2004. And yes, this just barely works, but thank Rao it does. The only gray area this movie leaves us with is when Jessica Cruz got her Green Lantern power ring. But what's interesting, and what helps solidify the idea that this movie might be closer to the end of JLU than certain executive producers may assume, is the timing of her camping trip. You know, the one with all the murdering and stuff. It's set 3 years prior to the movie, which would be 2002, potentially midway through the year. And oddly enough, this lines up pretty perfectly with the time gap between the end of Justice League and the beginning of Justice League Unlimited. And you know what else was supposed to take place during that time gap? Crisis on 2 Earths. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about, this was an animated movie from 2010 that was originally meant to be a DCAU film, titled Justice League Worlds Collide. Due to studio interference, what we wound up with was a hodgepodge of DCAU story elements with non-DCAU character designs and voice actors. But if you ignore all the continuity issues for just a second, fitting Crisis on 2 Earths into the DCAU kind of works. Like, it's the puzzle piece with the, like, oh, it's almost the right shape. I don't know. To be clear, it itself does not work, but a version of it could. It's not impossible to assume that the events of Crisis more or less happened in the actual DCAU, just with a handful of minor changes. It was supposed to be a bridge between the two Justice League series, and final product aside, it's easy to say that our league could have basically had the same adventure, fighting the crime syndicate with the heroic Lex Luthor, who's also naked at the start of this movie. What is with this trope? In Jessica Cruz's comic book origin, she actually receives her original power ring from powering the Green Lantern equivalent of the crime syndicate after his death in the New 52's Forever Evil storyline, which I've been indefinitely reading for the last year or so because I think I lost the volume I was on, and I just haven't. I'm not gonna replace it. I just gotta look for it harder, I guess. She gets Power Ring because it feeds on fear, and Jessica was seemingly irreparably traumatized by the deaths of her friends. Long story short, the ring later disintegrates and gets replaced with the Green Lantern Power Ring, which she's had ever since. So, because Crisis on Two Earths, or whatever version of it may have happened in this universe, occurred at roughly the same time as Jessica Cruz's camping trip, it starts to seem like her origin could be pretty transferable from the comics. That after the crime syndicate's incarceration, Power Ring either lost his ring or died somehow, and it came to Jessica, like in the New 52. Maybe right here when she's falling off the cliff at the end of her nightmare, but we may never know for sure until the Jessica Cruz direct-to-video movie that I'm sure Eric Carrasco is working on right now. So now that we know the present-day timeline for this movie, what about the future set segments? The scenes that take place in the time period of the Legion of Superheroes. Fortunately, it's rather easy to figure out. In this scene, Mr. Terrific says,
based on the residual tachyons, this substance comes from approximately 1,000 years in the future,
which would be roughly the year 3005. And Batman also confirms the time period when discussing Starboy.
He also claims he's from the 31st century,
which starts in the year 3001. This is pretty typical of Legion of Superheroes adventures. They're always roughly 1,000 years after whatever present-day story's happening. Like, they were always from the 30th century when it was the 1950s. But this 31st century time period is also when the JLU episode Far From Home, the Legion of Superheroes episode, is supposed to take place.
Approximately 1,000 years into your future, in what you'd call the 31st century.
So the only real question becomes, which comes first, the JLU chicken or the Fatal 5 egg? Well, option A, the Legion scenes from the movie come first. People who believe this is the case often point to the lack of Supergirl as primary evidence, her absence in this case suggesting that she hasn't yet arrived in the future. Or option B, the JLU episode comes first. This is backed up by Emerald Empress's face getting all two-faced at the end of the movie, and the Eye of Ekron straight up kamikazing into the sun. So while it's possible the Fatal Five could have retrieved, like, the other Eye of Ekron by JLU, and there's always
the miracles of modern medicine
to explain away Emerald Empress's lack of Scarface, I referenced two Batman villains. It seems much more likely that all these things happened after Far From Home from the Fatal Five's perspective. After all, Empress shouldn't be too surprised to see a Green Lantern if she just saw like a bunch of them.
A Green Lantern? That's a rare sight in this galaxy these days.
So if we're going with option B, which seems to me like the stronger conclusion, where is Supergirl? Well, it's pretty easy to say that she's just doing something else. In fact, when we recently talked to the film's writer, Eric Carrasco, he expressed the same notions.
Supergirl, putting her on the Justice League roster was going to really complicate the timeline and when this had to take place, and I just wanted to not get into that. And also, like, you know, Bouncing Boy is not in the future either, and he was a big part of that episode, so it's like, okay,
yeah.
where's Bouncing Boy?
Not canon!
He's with Supergirl, that's what I'm saying.
Eric, we're just gonna keep using you as examples because you keep giving us answers to things, so you shouldn't be surprised at this point. And in Far From Home, it's laid out pretty blatantly for us that Supergirl never returned from this mission, so her showing up at the end in the funeral scene just wouldn't make any sense. So now that we have everything laid out in a pretty decent fashion, let's take a look at this movie's timeline as a complete package. Using every reference to time and pop culture in this pig, here's the order of events of Justice League vs. the Fatal Five and how it fits in with JLU to the best of our ability. November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy is assassinated. Or is he?
There was a
magic bullet.
April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. delivers a speech at the Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee. 1981, the first Masters of the Universe mini-comic is released, debuting Skeletor.
Bring it, Skeletor.
If Miss Martian is truly a teenager by Earth standards, she would be born somewhere between 1986 and 1992. 2002, Jessica Cruz's camping trip takes a murderous turn for the worse, and presumably soon after, she's granted a Green Lantern power ring. The same year, the Justice League officially expands their roster in the episode Initiation. 2003, the Cadmus arc of episodes draws to a close, and the events of the film Batman and Harley Quinn play out in joyous musical fashion. Spring 2004, Destroyer, the conclusion of Justice League Unlimited. September 2004, a year prior to Justice League vs. the Fatal Five's finale, Emerald Empress and Validus are placed in holding cells on the planet Oa. 2 months later, in November 2004, the remaining Fatal Five and Starboy arrive in a time sphere, and Batman apprehends naked Starboy. By February 2005, the events of the Batman, Harley, and Ivy comic draw to a close when the original Arkham is still in use. Then Batman Mystery the Batwoman happens in spring 2005, and wait, what? Mystery the Batwoman happens inside the Fatal Five movie? I don't know what to make of that. We jump 10 months from Naked Boy to September 2005, where we stay for the remainder of the movie, which lasts roughly 3 days. Because of references to Joker, Harley, and Tim in the film, the Return of the Joker movie now has an earliest possible timeline point of September 2005, still able to happen by 2007 at the latest. And continuing on into the future, we have the Legion of Superheroes Superman episode New Kids in Town in 2979. Our best educated guess of the early 31st century places JLU's Far From Home, followed sometime afterward by the Legion battling and defeating the Fatal Five as seen in Starboy's mental recreation, and later Mono, Tharok, and the Persuader rushing the Legion HQ and stealing the Time Sphere in the first place. This is sometime between 3001 and 3005. I guess I was wrong about the 21 Bridges thing. Maybe the DCAU's Portland is just different from the real Portland. Ours is the real Portland, right? Robert, please confirm. I think my biggest takeaway from all this is next time I watch Fatal Five, I'm gonna get to the Starboy apprehension scene and then pause it, and then watch all of Mystery the Batwoman, and then unpause it and watch the rest of Fatal Five, which sounds both fun and just no good. In case you're interested, you can find an image version of this timeline linked in the description below, as well as the one we did for Batman and Harley Quinn, bringing back #graphical magnificence. And if you'd like a more detailed breakdown of the day-by-day of the movie, I'd highly recommend the Fatal Five timeline by YOJIMBO on the anime superhero message boards, which was created with help from Maddie's notes and deals with the time on Jessica Cruz's clock, time zone differences, all sorts of stuff like that. YOJIMBO has run the fansite DCAU Resource, formerly Justice League Resource, for a long time, and has laid a lot of the groundwork for some of the stuff we do here at WDB, so check him out. That's all down there. The only thing still bugging me is, why is Brainiac 5's hair gone? He has a super long mullet in his Superman appearance, and short hair in JLU, and now no hair. Come to think of it, Nightwing follows this exact same hair trend, more or less. Does that mean... oh no! Before we wrap things up, I want to give a shout out to our top Patreon supporters, Dark Poet 1792 and Robert Sterling, who, along with many other wonderful people, made this video possible by voting it into existence and more than generously donating every month to help us buy new audio equipment or editing software, and just in general helping to make the Watchtower Database something that we can continue to focus on like a real job. Speaking of jobs, why isn't Maddie doing his? Where the hell is he? What? Error? Error doing what? What is even happening? Will it canon? That is the question.